Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Well, today is day 17 of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. And all signs point to that the war will continue again unabated. So a lot to cover, and we'll just again jump right into our content. So right now, we're hearing out of Russia, out of Moscow, the Kremlin, from Vladimir Putin, that due to the ongoing arms shipments by the West, by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, to the Ukrainian military, at some point the Russian military may in fact start targeting those columns, those supply columns, bringing in those munitions into Ukraine. Now, is he referring to actually attacking them on the border once they cross the border, on the other side of the border? Again, very, very hard to say. But whatever Putin, whatever his long-range goals are in terms of occupying Ukraine, he is going to have to remove that element of Western support, or this war will never end in terms of Ukrainian resistance. And what we're also hearing from the White House, and this is what is becoming very, very concerning. Joe Biden is obviously stating that the United States will not fight Russia in Ukraine. That's very important. He's saying the United States will not fight Russia in Ukraine. However, he is indicating that there is a possibility that there could be conflict in other parts of the world, and wherever that could be. Could it be the Baltics? Could it be the issue with the transportation of these weapons crossing the border into Ukraine? Again, very, very difficult to say at this point, but it would appear that at least on the surface, the White House may be preparing U.S. society for a possible conflict with the Russians at some point. And obviously that would then migrate into Ukraine at some point if in fact that would occur. I would say at this point we are sitting at about 35 to 40% chance of a global war taking place between Russia, possibly China, and the West at this point. The situation continues to unravel, and Putin is very focused. The Kremlin is very focused in terms of what its objectives are in terms of Ukraine, and it does not look like it is holding back, and it's going to continue to follow through with that operation. And what's also concerning is, again, I would say at this point, the Baltics. I think you have to look very, very close at Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, and kind of what happens from there going forward. Then obviously Belarus, and then you have Kaliningrad as well. So again, very, very nasty situation. And again, as we head into day 17, I would ask everyone to remember just before the start of this conflict how the talking heads were. General Milley was saying in 72 hours the Russians would be in Kiev, and obviously I was absolutely saying something different, and obviously the Russians are not in Kiev 72 hours after the initial attack. But that is where we sit right now in terms of what you see on the map. Now, in terms of ongoing operations, it does appear that there is an uptick in Russian military operations, specifically to the northwest and west of Kiev, and to the northeast coming out of Chernihiv. It would appear again that the Russians are very, very focused and continue very intense artillery attacks now in the eastern and western suburbs of Kiev. There are reports on the ground that indicate heavy fighting is currently taking place both on the western bank of the Dnieper River, that is in this area, and the eastern bank of the Dnieper River as well. So at this point, it does appear that the Russians are attempting to make a push to get closer to the city and to continue to circumvent the city as well. We're hearing right now from reports coming out of Kiev that the Ukrainians may have up to 2 weeks of supplies if and when the city is sealed off by the Russians and a siege starts to actually take place, in which the Russians completely cut off the city. Again, I stand by my assessment that cutting the city off completely is going to be a very, very challenging endeavor for the Russians. Is it something they can't do? I would say no, it's not. They can do it. But I would also say I don't know how long they can maintain the siege of Kiev as well without additional successful operations taking place in other parts of the country. Again, as you see from this map, the Russians have fairly narrow supply corridors leading up to Kiev. And they're really challenged and continue to be challenged in these bigger cities such as Kharkov, such as Mariupol, and areas in the south as well. And again, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for the Russians to storm these almost mega cities, especially Kharkiv and Kiev and Odessa. These cities are hardened. So when these cities were built during the Soviet times, and obviously there's been additional construction that has taken place since the fall of the Soviet Union, but their subway system is hardened. It's designed to withstand nuclear blasts, and there are vast subways and tunnels that are under these cities that make them very, very easy to have forces being moved around the cityscape without those forces having to move above ground. So that is going to be an incredible challenge for the Russians as they attempt to again besiege these cities, and then at some point, quite possibly, have to take these cities. Now, if they besiege the cities for such a length of time that they can't get supplies, then that's another story, and they may capitulate. But again, if we go back and we look at history, we look at the siege of Stalingrad, the siege of Leningrad. Some of these cities held out for a very, very long time. And again, the question remains: do the Russians have the wherewithal and the fortitude to besiege these cities? In some case, maybe up to 30 to 90 days, depending on the city that they are besieging. And I think again that could be what we're looking at. And we're also hearing some really, really crazy things coming out of this conflict as well now that again lead me to believe that the possibility for escalation is absolutely there. We have Vladimir Putin escalating his nuclear posture. We have the Russians claiming that biological weapon sites have been discovered inside of the Ukraine. Whether you believe it or not, that is what the Russians are saying and claiming. And that is the message that is being sent to the Russian populace at this point as well. The Ukrainians, the West, NATO, are stating that the Russians may be on the verge of using tactical nuclear weapons or chemical weapons in this conflict. So again, just another element of escalation that continues to grow at this point. But again, as of today, the fighting seems to be upticking and seems to be more intense than in the last several days, especially near Kiev, on both the eastern bank of the Dnieper and the western bank of the Dnieper as well. And reports indicate that the Russians now may be about 9 miles from the city center. So absolutely close enough to shell the city center if, in fact, they were to decide to do that. So the Russians really haven't taken the gloves off in terms of what we're seeing in Kiev. Look, news broadcasts are still occurring from Kiev. The lights are still on in Kiev. We're not seeing any shelling in downtown Kiev. Now, that could change. And when that changes, I would say prepare yourself, because it's going to be something quite possibly that no one has really seen before in the modern era. I think, again, we would have to go back to the Korean War, and we would have to go back to World War II in terms of the destructive capacity of the Russian military if it decides to lay waste to Kiev. And that's a possibility. The Russians are positioning themselves, and if they get to a point where they feel that they would have to besiege the city and they do not have the assets to maintain that siege, well, if they're committed to taking Kiev, the only other option for the Russians is to launch a massive attack on the city. And again, in all probability, that would require the reduction of some of these urban areas by these heavy artillery units of the Russian military, especially when the Ukrainians are using many of these areas as defensive barriers to the Russian advance. And if the Ukrainians are using javelins, NLAWs, artillery, Stingers, and even tanks in the cities, then the Russians are going to have to use assets to destroy those Ukrainian military units in the city. And again, I think that is what we're seeing in terms of the Russian bombardments of some of these urban scapes. Is it possible that errors have been made in terms of the Russians hitting civilian targets? Yes, I believe that is possible and is absolutely occurring. At the same time, I do believe, by and far, the Russians are attempting to locate and destroy Ukrainian army units, and are not intentionally, at least on a wide scale level, are not intentionally targeting Ukrainian cities for destruction at this point. So again, it's something that is not something that I would say that we may not see. Again, if we go back to World War II, we go back to Germany, we go back to Japan. The Allies bombed many of those German and Japanese cities massively. And it was required to make the Germans and the Japanese understand that they were losing the war and they had lost. It was designed to crush the national morale and warfighting spirit of both the Germans and the Japanese. That thought process in terms of total war still exists today. And when you have two industrial-sized nations fighting each other the way we do now, Russia, very powerful industrial nation, the Ukraine, obviously not as powerful and not as industrial as Russia, it still has an immense industrial capacity that is also being now directly supported in terms of military means and economic means by the West, by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So if Russia truly wants to defeat Ukraine, then at some point it is going to have to destroy the national will of the Ukrainians to continue to fight. And in order to do that, sometimes, well, I would say not sometimes, most of the time, that is not going to be pretty. And unfortunately, we are probably going to witness that. There's a high probability we are going to witness that, and we are now starting to witness that in this conflict. But that is war. That is what we're seeing. What the Russians are doing right now is no different than what other nation states, even nation states that you, the viewer, would identify as being a lawful entity, such as the United States. Indeed, the United States had to resort to some of these same methods during large-scale military operations, especially against the North Koreans and obviously the Germans and Japanese. And I would also say we saw it in more of a limited scope in, say, the battles for Fallujah as well. So we did see the United States use a tremendous amount of kinetic military force inside of those cities in Iraq because the opposing force in that city did not want to give up. And again, that level of kinetic activity had to be risen and engaged, and eventually they destroyed those units in Fallujah. But again, that is kind of what we're seeing within the context of this conflict. Again, it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be nice, and it continues. Right now, again, all eyes are kind of on right now Kiev. It does appear there is a concerted effort by the Russians to either circumvent or to force its way much, much closer to the downtown areas of Kiev, and we will continue to watch this as this fighting takes place with more information soon to come. Have a good day, everybody.